My brother asked me to deceive our parents to steal $50K from them. When I refused, he assaulted me at my house. But my father disinherited him, and now he works for me as an employee. I'm 28 years old. A few months ago, I got engaged to my lifelong girlfriend, and now we're having a baby. I mean, this should be the happiest moment of my life, right? But what happened with my older brother basically ruined what should have been a perfect family celebration and ended up exposing a bunch of lies that had been piling up for years. The truth is, I'm still processing all of this because I never thought my own brother would go that far. I should start at the beginning, I guess. My brother Jordan is 30, 2 years older than me. And when we were kids, we were pretty close, the normal brother stuff. We played video games, fought over stupid things, that kind of thing. My parents, David and Susan, always treated us well. We never had money problems because my dad was a cardiovascular surgeon, retired now, and my mom was a journalist until she had us. We grew up in a comfortable house, went to good schools, all that. We weren't millionaires or anything, but we definitely had privileges that many don't have, and my parents were always clear that they expected us to use those opportunities to make something of our lives. Things started to change like 5 years ago when Jordan met Michelle. She's 29 now. And from the beginning, it was clear she came from a very different family than ours. Not in economic terms because her parents also have money, but in values, let's say. Michelle is one of those people who are always comparing houses, cars, vacations, you know what I mean? At first, I thought it was just insecurity, but over time I realized that's really just how she is. My parents tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. They invited her to family dinners, tried to include her, but she always found some excuse not to come or to leave early. And the worst part is that, little by little, Jordan started doing the same thing. When they got married 3 years ago, it was like Jordan simply decided that his new family was more important than us. He started missing birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, always with the same excuse that Michelle's parents wanted to see them or that they had other plans. My mom would cry every time he canceled at the last minute, but my dad, who's much more stoic, would just say that Jordan was an adult and made his own decisions. I tried talking to him a couple of times. Like, "Hey brother, we miss seeing you. Mom is sad," but he always came back with how I didn't understand how complicated it was to keep two families happy. So basically we drifted further and further apart until we practically only saw each other at super important events, and not even then. Meanwhile, I was continuing with my life. I've been with Lauren since I was 21, she's 26 now, and she's literally the best person I know. She's a nurse, works in pediatrics, and has infinite patience, not just with kids but with me too, because I admit I can be kind of intense sometimes. Like 2 years ago, I started planning to open my own shipping and logistics business, nothing huge but something that could grow over time, and Lauren supported me through the whole process. Even when it meant I was working until 3 in the morning, doing business plans and looking for investors. The thing is, a few months ago, I finally proposed to her. I planned everything. Took her to that restaurant where we had our first date. She said, yes, obviously, and my parents were thrilled because they really love Lauren. Like, my mom always says she's the daughter she never had. We decided to throw a small party at my parents' house to celebrate the engagement, nothing too formal, just close family and some friends. I invited Jordan, mainly because my mom insisted it was important for him to be there, and to my surprise, he said he'd come. The night of the party, Lauren and I arrived early to help set everything up. There were like 30 people, nice decorations that my mom insisted on putting up even though I told her it wasn't necessary, that kind of thing. Jordan and Michelle arrived late, as always, but when they walked in, something about Jordan's face seemed weird to me. I don't know, like nervous or anxious, I couldn't tell you exactly. But anyway, I let it go because it was a night to celebrate. After a while, when we'd already toasted and all that, Lauren pulled me aside and told me, I have to tell you something. And there she told me she was pregnant. I literally was in shock. Like, we knew we wanted kids eventually, but we didn't think it would happen so fast. I started crying right there. I didn't care who saw me, and I hugged her and told her it was the best news in the world. We went to tell my parents and my mom got hysterical with happiness. My dad hugged us both and said we were going to be incredible parents. and honestly, it was one of the most perfect moments of my life. But then Jordan came over with Michelle and said, "We also have an announcement." And there they told us that Michelle was also pregnant. The room filled with more screams of happiness and hugs, and I was genuinely happy for them because, despite everything, he's still my brother, you know? I thought maybe this would be an opportunity to reconnect, for our kids to grow up together as cousins. After things calmed down a bit, Jordan told me if we could talk in private. We went out to the back patio, and there he started telling me that they'd been trying to get pregnant for almost 2 years, that they'd spent a fortune on IVF treatments, and that they were basically broke. He said that between the treatments, the doctors, the medications, and everything, they'd spent like $120,000, maybe more. I was like, wow, I had no idea. I'm so sorry, brother. That must have been so hard. And then he dropped the bomb. He told me, "I need you to do me a favor, Adrian." He asked if I could ask our parents for money, but not for him directly, but pretending that I needed it for my new business. The idea was that I would tell them I needed like $50,000 for an urgent investment or something, and when they gave me the money, I would pass it to him. In exchange, he would give me half, meaning $25,000 that I could use for whatever I wanted. He said it was perfect because Dad and Mom would never say no to my business, that they'd always supported me more, and that it was a way for everyone to win. I stood there, staring at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. I told him, "Jordan, are you crazy? You're asking me to deceive our parents, to lie to their faces to get money from them that isn't even for me. Do you really think that's okay?" He came back with how I didn't understand the pressure they were under. That Michelle came from a family where everyone had huge houses and luxury cars, and that he needed to be able to provide for her and the baby. I told him that wasn't my problem, and that, honestly, it sounded like Michelle had totally unrealistic expectations if she thought they needed that lifestyle to be happy. The conversation got tense fast. He started raising his voice, saying that I'd always been the favorite son, that I'd always been given everything I asked for, and that now, when he needed help, I was turning my back on him. I responded that Dad and Mom had always treated us equally, that the difference was that I cared about maintaining a relationship with them while he'd spent 5 years basically ignoring them. And then I told him something else. Something I maybe shouldn't have said at that moment. But that was true. That I wasn't going to make him a partner in my business. Turns out that a few days before, Jordan had sent me a message asking if he could invest in my shipping company and be a partner. I hadn't given him an answer yet because honestly I didn't know how to tell him no without him getting angry. But there I blurted it out. I told him I didn't. Trust that he'd have the same level of commitment as me, and that besides I needed someone who really understood the business, not just someone who wanted easy money. He got furious, told me I was selfish and that I was going to regret it, and went into the house, leaving me there on the patio. I thought that was the end of it. That he'd leave with Michelle, and that maybe we wouldn't talk for a while until he got over being angry. But like a week later, he showed up at my apartment. I was working from home that day, and when I opened the door, there he was, with a face I'd never seen on him. He told me we needed to talk, that he had something important to tell me. I let him in, though the truth is I was still kind of annoyed about the party thing. He sat in my living room and started with a speech about how he'd sacrificed everything for me. He said that when I was 17 and deciding what university to go to, he had given up his first choice university so that I could go to mine. According to him, we'd both applied to the same university, one of those super competitive and expensive schools, and he'd given up his spot so that Dad and Mom could pay my tuition instead of his. He said that's why he had to go to a less prestigious state university, and that his whole life had been affected by that decision he made for me. I listened to him with my mouth open because, honestly, I didn't remember any of that at all. I told him, "Jordan, what are you talking about? I didn't know anything about this." He insisted it was true. That Dad and Mom never told me because they didn't want me to feel guilty, but that he'd carried that burden all this time. He said that now that he needed me, it was my turn to return the favor, that I owed him for that sacrifice, and that the least I could do was help him with the money plan or make him a partner in the business. Something didn't add up at all with that story. First, because my parents were never the type to hide important things from me. Second, because I remembered that when Jordan was applying to universities, he specifically said he wanted to stay close to home and that's why he chose the state university. And third, because the age difference between us meant that when I was applying to universities, he'd already been at his for 2 years, so the timing didn't make sense. I told him I needed to verify that with Dad and Mom before making any decision. He got super defensive and told me no, that if I asked them, they'd just deny it to protect me, and that I had to trust him. But I was already kind of suspecting that something wasn't right with this whole situation. I told him I was going to talk about it with our parents anyway, and he got up and left furious, saying I was ungrateful and didn't deserve his help or loyalty. That same afternoon, I went to my parents' house. I arrived without warning, which I normally don't do, but I felt like I needed to talk to them as soon as possible. When I told them what Jordan had said about the supposed university sacrifice, my dad went completely quiet for a moment, and then sighed in that way he sighs when he's very disappointed. My mom started crying immediately, which scared me because I didn't understand what was happening. My dad explained the truth to me. Jordan never gave up anything for me. In fact, he hadn't even been accepted to that competitive university he supposedly gave up. What really happened was that Jordan had applied, was rejected, and then went to Dad asking him to use his connections and money to basically bribe his way into the university. My dad, who's super strict about those integrity issues because his whole life he worked hard to get where he got without help, told him, absolutely not, that if he wasn't accepted on his own merits, then he'd go to another university. Jordan apparently got really angry at that moment and told my parents they were ruining his life, that I'd always been the favorite and that he'd never have the same opportunities as me. My parents tried to explain that it wasn't about favoritism but about principles, that they weren't going to buy his way in anywhere because that would be dishonest, and besides wouldn't do him any favors in the long run. But Jordan didn't want to listen and basically held on to that resentment for years, rewriting the story in his head until he convinced himself he'd made some great sacrifice. I sat there processing all this while my mom cried, saying it was her fault, that maybe they'd been too hard on Jordan, that maybe they should have handled the situation differently. My dad told her no, that they'd done the right thing, and that Jordan needed to learn to accept the consequences of his decisions instead of blaming everyone else. I then told them about the plan Jordan had proposed, to trick them out of money. My dad turned livid, like I'd never seen him so angry. He said Jordan had crossed a very serious line, that trying to manipulate me to scam his own family was unforgivable. My mom kept crying and saying she didn't understand how her son had become like this, where they'd gone wrong as parents. I told them it wasn't their fault, that they'd always given us good values, and that Jordan had made his own decisions, especially after marrying Michelle. My dad mentioned he'd always suspected Michelle had a bad influence on Jordan, but that he'd hoped that over time Jordan would mature and see things more clearly. I left my parents' house feeling horrible. I blocked Jordan's number because honestly I didn't want to deal with more drama. I needed to focus on Lauren, on the baby coming, on my business. I thought maybe over time things would calm down and we could eventually have some kind of civilized relationship, but that for now I needed distance. But like 2 weeks later, Jordan and Michelle showed up at my apartment. It was a Saturday morning, like 9 o'clock, and I'd just gotten up. Lauren was there too, making breakfast. When I opened the door, Jordan walked in without me inviting him, with Michelle behind him, and started yelling at me about how dare I poison our parents against him, that I'd always been a manipulative liar, and that because of me, they were going to lose their house. Michelle started saying I was selfish, that they were just asking for help, and that I was being cruel by denying them what they needed. Lauren tried to intervene, telling them to calm down, and that if they wanted to talk, we could do it like adults. But Michelle completely ignored her and kept yelling. Jordan kept saying over and over that he was my brother, that family was supposed to support each other, and that I'd destroyed any chance of them having a decent life. At some point, I lost my patience and yelled at them to get out of my house. I told them I wasn't going to tolerate them coming to my home to disrespect me and Lauren, that if they wanted to talk, they could do it civilly and with an appointment, but that I wasn't. I'm going to allow this type of behavior. Jordan pushed me. Not hard, but enough that I stepped back, and Lauren got between us, telling him to leave or she'd call the police. Michelle started crying, saying they couldn't believe I was going to threaten them with the police, that we were family. I told them they'd crossed every possible line, that they'd lied to me, had tried to manipulate me to scam our parents, and now they came to my house to physically assault me. I told them they had 10 seconds to leave, or I really would call the police. They left. But before leaving, Jordan told me this wasn't going to end like this, that he was going to fight for what was his. Lauren was shaking after they left. I'd never seen my brother like that. So aggressive and out of control, and neither had she. I hugged her and promised I wouldn't let it affect us, that we had to focus on ourselves and the baby. But inside, I was terrified that Jordan would really try to do something more. I called my parents and told them what had happened. My mom got hysterical, saying she was going to come stay with us to make sure we were okay. My dad was quieter, but I could hear in his voice that he was furious. He told me not to worry, that he'd take care of the situation. What my dad did was call his lawyer. A few days later, Jordan received a legal letter informing him that my father was modifying his will. Basically, Jordan was going to be disinherited except for a collection of antique watches that my dad had been keeping, and that technically he'd already promised Jordan years ago. Everything else, the house, the investments, the savings accounts, everything was going to be for me. The letter also said that if Jordan tried to contact me or Lauren in any threatening way again, my dad would take more serious legal action. My mom wasn't completely okay with this. She thought it was too severe, that Jordan was going through a bad time and needed support, not punishment. But my dad was firm. He said, Jordan needed to learn that actions have consequences, and that until he showed a real change in his behavior and attitude, this was the right decision. Like 3 weeks after that, Jordan showed up alone at my parents' house. My mom called to tell me, and I went over there because I wanted to be present. I didn't know what intentions he was coming with. When I arrived, Jordan was sitting in the living room with my mom, and he looked horrible. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, looked like he hadn't slept in days. My mom was crying again, hugging him, and he was crying too. When he saw me walk in, he stood up and apologized to me. He said he'd been completely wrong about everything. That financial pressure and Michelle's expectations had led him to make horrible decisions, and that he had no excuse for having treated his family that way. He said he'd been to therapy a couple of times and was starting to see things more clearly. He asked me to forgive him and to please help him reconcile with Dad, because he didn't know how to do it alone. Honestly, I didn't know whether to believe him. Part of me wanted to hug him and tell him everything was okay, that I forgave him and we could start over. But another part of me was still super angry and didn't trust that this wasn't another manipulation. I asked him where Michelle was, and he said she was at her parents' house, that they'd been having problems in the marriage since all this exploded. My dad arrived while we were talking. When he saw Jordan, his face showed no emotion. He stood in the doorway of the living room and said, "Give me a reason to listen to you." Jordan stood up and started apologizing again, but my dad interrupted him. He told him, "Jordan, for 5 years, you ignored your mother and me. Then you tried to use your brother to rob us. Then you went to his house and assaulted him. Now you come here crying, asking for forgiveness. Why should I believe you?" Jordan didn't know what to say. My mom tried to defend Jordan, saying that everyone makes mistakes and that he deserved another chance. But my dad told her this went beyond a mistake, that it was a pattern of behavior that had lasted years. Then my dad told him something none of us expected. He said, "If you really want to earn my forgiveness and your inheritance, you're going to have to work for it." Literally. He explained that my shipping business was about to officially launch in a couple of months, and that I was going to need employees. He told Jordan that if he really wanted to prove he'd changed, he'd work for me, not as a partner but as an employee. With the salary I decided to pay him, doing the work I assigned him, and that only after he proved for at least 2 years that he could be reliable, honest, and hardworking would my dad consider restoring his inheritance. Jordan's face was priceless. He looked humiliated, angry, but also desperate. He looked at my mom, hoping she'd intercede, but she was just crying. Quietly, he looked at me, and I honestly didn't know what to say. On one hand, the idea of having my brother working for me sounded super uncomfortable. On the other hand, maybe it was exactly what he needed to learn some humility. Jordan took like 5 minutes to respond. He finally said he'd do it, that he'd work for me if that's what he had to do. My dad then softened a bit and said that while Jordan was working and showing genuine effort, he and my mom would help him with a loan so he could stabilize his financial situation, but that it would be a real loan with a contract and monthly payments, not a gift. So now, basically, my brother works for me. He started like 6 weeks ago, and I'm not gonna lie, it's weird. Lauren says it's important that I establish clear boundaries and not mix the personal relationship with the professional one. And she's right, obviously. Jordan does what I tell him, arrives on time, doesn't complain, but I can see in his eyes that he hates every second of this. Michelle is apparently furious with the whole situation and is pressuring him to quit the job and find another solution, but so far, he's held firm. My parents lent him $25,000 so he could catch up on his most urgent debts. They signed a contract where he commits to paying them $500 a month for the next 5 years. My mom wanted to just forgive the money, but my dad insisted that Jordan needed to learn financial responsibility. Lauren had an ultrasound last week, and everything looks good with the baby. We're having a girl, which has me super excited and terrified at the same time. Michelle is also still pregnant. I think she's in her second trimester now, but we haven't talked much about that because things are still tense. My mom says she hopes that when the babies are born, everything will get better and we can be a united family again. But I'm not so sure that's going to happen soon. What I do know is that this situation taught me a lot about the importance of maintaining your integrity, even when people you love pressure you to do the opposite. Lauren told me something that stuck with me. That family doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse or dishonesty, that sometimes protecting your own peace and values is more important than maintaining a relationship at any cost. And I think she's right.